I'm Zeke Miller, White House correspondent for the Associated Press. This is the first time and the loudest time we've publicly seen the Biden administration message to the Israelis that should they continue with their ground operation inside Gaza after the expiration of the current temporary truce that has allowed these hostages to be released, if Israel goes back to a large-scale ground operation inside Gaza in the south, that the U.S. expects them to take a vastly more tailored operation, more surgical approach rather than and avoid the sort of mass displacement of civilians that we saw with hundreds of thousands of Gazan civilians fleeing southward in the earlier days of this conflict. So the U.S. wants to see a very different sort of Israeli military operation should things continue. U.S. officials have said that they believe they've heard responsive and sort of positive signals from the Israelis that they understand that if they carry out their military operation in the south, it will have to look different than it did in the north. But we have not heard publicly from the Israelis in response to this latest development in the U.S. The U.S. Secretary of State is on a trip to the region. He's going to visit with Israeli officials and with Palestinian officials in the West Bank. High on the list now for the U.S. is the humanitarian situation in southern Gaza, or in Gaza in general. So Blinken will be there raising the plight of the civilian humanitarian concerns, still lending support to Israel's right to defend itself, which has been the Biden administration's position, but certainly elevating the plight of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, both with the Israelis and within the wider region. Also, CIA Director Bill Burns is in the region, where he is carrying out, like we've seen over the last several weeks, highly sensitive negotiations. He sort of served as a pivotal back channel with the Israelis, with some other regional partners, and he's trying to find ways of extending the temporary truce to allow for the release of more hostages beyond the expiration right now, which is scheduled for through Wednesday. It's unclear how successful those talks will be, but Burns has really emerged as a important behind-the-scenes figure in carrying out some of those very delicate negotiations. Public opinion when it comes to foreign policy issues is always a tough one to read, but in this case, certainly surveys, including AP polling, show the American people are broadly supportive of Israel's right to defend itself. There's also growing concern for the plight of civilians in Gaza, and particularly among Democrats, and that is a constituency that Biden has to cater to, and that's why that's made his political tightrope a little bit more difficult. The U.S. certainly does want to see and has bought into the Israeli goals of eradicating Hamas in Gaza, but they are encouraging the Israelis to take a more circumscribed approach to actually carrying that out in the weeks ahead should the fighting resume.